Hey, hey everybody. Welcome to another Tuesday. Thomas Dimitrovich here. This is a recorded session. I'm out on location at an event, and I was talking to somebody today about recording the program for the session that you're watching. And he changed my mind on the fly on what I was going to talk about. You're going to learn what I'm going to talk about, and it all starts now. Hey everybody. So now, I gotta tell you. So I'm at an event, and I decided. So I'm down talking to a few individuals about just different things going on in the industry and whatnot. And I had mentioned that I have to record a session for IAEI News Live tonight before the program tomorrow. I hadn't anticipated not being able to go live. So, well, one thing leads to another, and then you end up having to basically do a program and record it. And they asked me, well, what are you going to do it on? And I said, well, I'm going to talk about 2020 code changes. I said, because a lot of states are on the 2020 edition of the National Electrical Code. And this individual I was talking to, he says, he goes, what would be a good idea is if you talk about the differences between 2020 and 2023. And I'm like, well, that's a code change for 2023 code cycle. And he goes, no. He goes, there are jurisdictions that are on the 2020 code that are coming across areas of installations that where the code requirements were improved during the 2023 code cycle. And in some cases, there's new technology addressed in the latest edition of the code that state or jurisdiction can't take advantage of because they're on an older edition of the code. And he says it would be great to just take a look at some of those areas where there's differences to say, look, if you're working on this type of application, oh, by the way, you should go take a look at the 2023, and then maybe the local jurisdiction, the authority having jurisdiction, may recognize some of these items. Now, there's probably a whole debate in that whole area. But I thought that's intriguing. So I thought I would take and do a session. We're going to take a look at some of the 2020 code changes, but what I do want to do is point out some of those areas where the 2023 maybe gives you a little bit of relief over what is required in the 2020 code. And then also the 2023 code addresses some areas and gaps in those areas where we argue and debate based upon the installation. The code panel settles those arguments. So that is sort of where I'm focused on. So if I think about where I was going to go today, I was going to go into this analysis of 2020 code changes and talk a little bit about the this whole thing that we call the 2020 code and go over some significant changes and all that jazz. But again, I thought that was a pretty cool observation from this individual that I was talking to. So in any case, that's sort of where what I'm looking at. So let me just get things set up here, because like I said, I was completely not thinking about doing this type of a program. So I am I'm changing my thought process. So here we go, on the fly, might I say, on the fly. All right. So let me do this. I am going to, what's kind of cool about, I'm on the road, but, we can get a lot of cool stuff done. All right. So I just want to make sure that this slide looks good and do that. All right. There we go. All right. So let's talk about, first thing I do want to say, the IAEI, you can still get information and curriculum and books about the 2020 code changes, the analysis of changes. So please remember that if your state, your jurisdiction is still on the 2020 code, and if you want to learn more about the 2020 edition of the National Electrical Code, you can still get these resources. I believe you can probably still buy the code book. And if you have NFPA link, you can still get to the 2020 edition of the code. You can take a look at that. Be mindful, though, of what your state adopted, which is a whole nother area. The temporary interim amendments deal where if your state adopted the first edition of the code versus all of those erratas and temporary interim amendments, you guys and gals probably know a lot more about how you deal with, in your local jurisdiction, how you deal with those types of items and areas. But the AHJ does have that flexibility to enforce something that might be a little bit different, and you don't go out as far on the limb if it's a part of a code requirement, that whether it was implemented by a temporary interim amendment or an errata, whatnot, because those are formal changes. It's not Tom's rule or Joe Schmuckatelli's rule. It's basically what either a code panel has agreed upon via a temporary interim amendment, or NFPA has recognized as an errata and has fixed. So, but please be mindful that you can still get these wonderful, beautiful, unbelievably awesome resources from IAEI. All right, so what I do want to say, I'm just looking through some of the significant changes. Now, remember in the 2020 code, they made a modification in 90.2. The scope, remember we had a couple areas of concern in regard to two areas. One, shore power, right? Marina applications where you have a vessel, can't call it a vehicle, but you have a vessel, you have a boat, and we put some provisions in Article 555 that talks about supplying power, a temporary or either a portable or a separate unit that you can check a boat. We put a requirement in that you have to have this ability to test the leakage currents of a boat before they plug into the marina, because you don't want them to bring the entire marina down because there's an internal fault. Because remember what we did in Article 555, we added more ground fault protection as part of the requirements for the installation. We added a layered approach to ground fault detection and protection. So you have 4 to 6 milliamps out there on your standard receptacle outlets, that 15 and 20 amps. You have 30 milliamp ground fault protection of equipment that's going to the boat. And then you had 100 milliamps back up at the feeders. So we ended up with a tiered approach in Article 555, but the challenge and the concern was we didn't want to portray that we are placing requirements on the vessel itself, because the vessel, like a vehicle, is built to other standards. May not be required. A vehicle is pretty much required to go through some tests, but boats aren't necessarily. Those are typically elective type of applications. So we added some clarity here in 90.2, saying that the installation supplying shore power to ships and watercraft is included, including that monitoring of leakage current. Just to be clear, that we're not on the boat itself. And this was in response to electric shock drowning. So when you look out at these applications, that boat, these beautiful vessels that are sitting there aren't covered by the NEC, but when you look at things like these pedestals and supplying power out to that boat, that's all covered by the NEC. It's a part of the infrastructure. All right, so we added that clarity in 90.2. We also had discussions, and we introduced this concept about exporting power from electric vehicles to premises wiring. So we had in the 2020 code this introduction of the concepts of supplying power to, or exporting power. So, okay. The reason that language was entered into the document was because back in 625, I think it's 625. 625 is that electric vehicles? Yes. Electric vehicle power transfer systems. There were requirements that were placed on an electric vehicle that basically required ground fault circuit interrupter protection for the receptacles on an electric vehicle. So I am looking for that. Here we go. In 625.54, we say, in addition to the requirements in 210.8, all receptacles installed for the connection of electric vehicle charging shall have ground fault circuit interrupter protection for personnel. And in 625.60, AC receptacle outlets used for electric vehicle EVPE. I hate when we put the acronyms in there. Electric vehicle power exchange. I can't remember what EVPE stands for. I got to go back up to the top. EVPE. It's a defined term, electric vehicle power export equipment. All right. Acronyms. We live in a world of acronyms. So let's go back down to 625.60. You have AC receptacle outlets used for EVPE. And in D of that section, you have ground fault circuit interrupter protection for personnel shall be provided for all receptacles. The ground fault circuit interrupter indication and reset shall be installed in a readily accessible location. Well, there was a lot of confusion on, are we talking about the receptacles on the boat or on the electric vehicle? Got boats on the brain. So we had to make sure that we were clear on what is covered and what isn't covered by the National Electrical Code. So we added some clarity up front. And what we added in new item 6, we basically are addressing the installations used to export power from the electric vehicles to premises wiring. Now, remember that this whole concept of reverse power, so power being able to come from, open up the 2023 code. So power coming, we're all familiar with powering the electric vehicle, but now we're introducing this concept of taking power from the vehicle when we need it and powering either the structure or powering the grid. Okay. So, and I would say probably powering the grid is even more of a, I would say that was probably arguably the first intent. Where when you think about all of these buses that we have that are parked for a good portion of the year, if we have electric buses out there transporting our children to and from school, et cetera, on those off hours, that they are not transporting our students to and from school, they can use those buses as peakers, basically. Right. So what a peaker was before for a utility, gas turbines, things like that. If they, during those periods of the day where they needed more power on the grid, they would start up what they call peakers for that peak demand, and the peakers would help them ride through those areas. Well, if they can tap those batteries that aren't being used anyway, then that's even better, right? So the other concept is now, well, hey, if I can tap those, then maybe all of these vehicles that are parked in garages across the country, maybe I can tap those too. So in any case, what we did in the 2023 code was we added provisions for the ability to power from the vehicle back up to the structure. So if I look at if you look at Article 625, so go out to NFPA link, take a look at Article 625, you'll see there's a wireless power transfer equipment that was added in for the 2023 code cycle. So recognizing the different technology to be able to power the equipment. We also, in the 2023 code cycle, which wasn't in the 2020, recognize energy management systems, right? So what we're realizing now, that if you have all of these vehicles that you have to power, and if there's requirements that says, hey, you have to put X amount of vehicle charging in your facility, the 2020 code didn't recognize the use of these energy management systems. The 2023 made it very clear that when you have an energy management system that's installed and designed in accordance with 750.30, providing load management of the EVSE equipment, the maximum equipment load on a service and feeder shall be the maximum load permitted by the EMS. So now I can leverage an EMS, and that means that I have now provisions in the 2023 code cycle that may help me in sizing my equipment, where if I'm following an earlier edition of the code, I might have to oversize my equipment to accommodate the loads. But if I'm using an energy management system, there's recognition in the latest edition of the NEC that helps me right size my equipment. So you can see that the perspective of the gentleman I was talking to today, that if I have an old, let's say it's not the 2020, let's say it's even older than the 2020 edition, and I have an older edition of the code, and I don't want to size my service and feeders very large to handle this load. I want to employ an energy management system. Well, there's no provisions for the older editions of the NEC, but there are provisions for that technology in the latest edition of the NEC. So this speaks to a couple things. Timely adoption is critical. You would have to, now, if you wanted to leverage this and you want to follow the rules in the latest edition of the code, whether it be in 625 or the provisions that are found in 705 for interconnected systems, or even the requirements that are back there in Article 220 related to energy management systems, then you would have to be trying to convince the AHJ to recognize requirements that are in a later edition or a more recent edition of the NEC. The challenge is there as the AHJ has to look at that. What do you think they're going to think about? Well, they're going to say, well, what are the unintended consequences? Were there other changes in the NEC that are related to this that you're not following? Even though you may follow this one section, maybe there are other things you should be doing that you're not doing, and maybe those are a little bit more stricter than what the older editions were. So because you're using a different technology, so you have to weigh all of that. So it's not just a clear cut, hey, go do what the 2023 does. You do have to put thought into it. You have to build your argument. And you and your AHJ have to go into it together. But it might be worth your time to do that than try to spend that money in equipment. So in any case, so you have, for the electric vehicles, you have the energy management system, which is newer technology and the ability to employ that. You have the wireless transfer, which is included in the 2023. So if you have older technology or an older version of the book, but if you're in an older version of the NEC, even older than the 2020, and you have new technology that's addressed in the newest edition to things, you should be educating your HJ and maybe educating your lawmakers in your jurisdiction to say these are the reasons why we need timely code adoption, right? Technology is going at the speed of light, and we're not keeping up in the code if you're not adopting the latest edition of the code. All right, so if I go to 705 is another chapter that has changed in the 2023, more so, that you can leverage in your interconnected systems, putting some provisions in for energy management when you are downstream of the service over current protected device. And that would be 705.11 or 12. 12 talks about the load side, and you have the feeders and taps, the ampacity. The power source output connection is made at a location other than, you got the 125%. You have the bus bars, and then you have in 705.13 the provisions again for an energy management system. So these energy management systems can help you make power systems that are, I won't say sized smaller, I'll say right sized for the application. Okay, so that's just one area. So electric vehicles, the interconnecting of electric vehicles, reverse power feed, all that good stuff, energy management. There's an area that you can explore if you're on a later, I'll call it an older edition of the NEC, that you might be able to leverage the newer edition of the NEC's provisions to help you with some of those applications. All right, so how about another area? Let's talk Article 210. Everybody loves Article 210. We had, in our meeting today, we had a lot of discussion about our Article 210. And if you go to 210.52, these are your receptacle outlets. And if I pull up the 2020 code, let me do this. Let me hit X. Let me discard changes. And I need to go to 210.52. There's 210.15. I'm telling you, I'm just going through the slides here, looking for 210.52. All right, here we go. 210, that's 14, 42, 42, 210.53. That was 210.52. Oh, 220. I'm in the wrong. Man, I wasn't in 210. There we go. All right, so remember what we did. We get this. Here we go. We get this. This is like last couple code cycles. We argue, and even before I got on the code panel too, when Jim Pauly was on panel 2, they had the same types of debates. Islands and peninsulas. Remember, we went from back in the day, before 1990 code, we had no receptacles required on islands and peninsulas. And then in 1990, you began the requirement of having one receptacle. And then we changed remember we have the debate about what's the connecting edge. Is it the front end of the counter? Is the connecting edge the wall end of the counter? We tried to add clarity in that. And in this cycle, this 2020 cycle, we thought this was the greatest thing since apple pie. We went to a square foot calculation and we measured the length and the width of the counter, and we said, look, we're going to require at least one for whatever size it is, and then as you calculate your square footage, you will increase the number of receptacles based upon you have at least one receptacle for the first 9 square foot. You have an additional receptacle outlet required for every additional 18 square foot or fraction thereof. And then at least one receptacle has to be located within 2 foot of the outer end. And then the peninsula countertop measurements are taken from the connected perpendicular wall. So we added clarity on all this stuff, right? The previous cycle, we had the long edge, the short edge, and oh my gosh, it was a nightmare. We thought we had the greatest thing since apple pie on panel 2, but then we realized, oh boy, it's probably worse than what it was. And then we did this, and then we had a lot of people go, well, wait a second. The problem that we had here, right? So the problem that we had here, we don't tell you where to put the receptacles. So I was given pictures by inspectors where they would, like what we do the calculation here, we show a receptacle here, we show a receptacle here, and a receptacle here, which you would go, hey, that's probably what they should do. But no, that's not what we would that's not what we were seeing. In some areas, let me do this and clear pen marks. So in some areas, they were putting the receptacles all right there. They'd have 1, 2, 3. They'd have 3 separate boxes because you can't have one gang box. And I would get questions. They'd say, hey, Tom, can I have 3 duplex receptacles in one large gang box? And I'm like, well, no, because it says a receptacle outlet shall be provided for every additional 18 square foot. Remember, an outlet, what is an outlet? An outlet is the box, and inside that box, I'm gonna really booger this up. You've got 2 receptacles, right? And we'll put the little screw up there, we'll put the little screw down there, and then we'll draw the yoke, all that good stuff. So this is 2 receptacles. It's a duplex, 2 receptacles in one receptacle outlet. I don't know, something just moved in this room. So this is the outlet, and this is the receptacle. So I have 1 receptacle in 1 outlet, or I have 2 receptacles in 1 receptacle outlet. The way the language says, a receptacle outlet. So I can't say I'm going to put 1 long box. Let's do this, clear open. So I can't say I'm going to do this. If I needed 2 receptacle outlets, I can't do this. And I know my drawing is terrible. This with a yoke, there we go, and that's connected. That is 4 receptacles, 2 duplex receptacles in 1 receptacle outlet. So we would get those questions, and I couldn't understand why I was getting those questions. And then it dawned on me because I was cornered. I went to do a presentation at a facility. And I walk in, and there's electrical inspectors with some contractors, all sitting in a conference room. And as soon as I walked in, it was like, "Hey, you get over here." So I went over, and they had drawings and they had pictures, and they were shown 1, 2, 3, all right there, right next to each other. And they were having this debate on whether or not it's one receptacle outlet or do I need 3 individual receptacle outlets. And I said, it says a receptacle outlet. So you would need 3 boxes. If you needed 3 receptacle outlets, you need 3 boxes, and you can put a duplex in each. You could put a single receptacle in each. Didn't need a duplex. So, but probably a single receptacle is more expensive than a duplex. I don't know. I don't know what the prices are out there, but in any case, that was the challenge. So what do we do in the 2023 code cycle? Well, we made all of this optional in the 2023 code cycle. We said, look, here's the problem that you have. You have, I'm going to do this. I'm going to discard. I'm going to go back, and I'm going to look at the 2023. Boy, I'm hoping this is it. Let's see. All right, so we're going to find 210.52 in here, and I should just search for it. 210.8. I mean, look at all of this. This is just like 210.23. Here we go. Here's what we did. We realized in the 2023 code cycle that when you put a receptacle on the face below the countertop, you're promoting the cords hanging over. And what was happening? We found that there are a lot of instances of children pulling the crock pots and the grease spots off of these countertops. So we wanted to put a prohibition on placing that receptacle on the outside of these cabinets below the countertop. And how we did it was we said, well, look, we're going to make it optional. But if you do put one there, then it's going to be in the top as a pop-up, or maybe if you had a double layer, like, if you had one of those cabinets that did something like this, where you have the cabinet and then you have a little wall and then another cabinet on the top, you could put a receptacle right in there, right? So sort of right in here on this face where you have that double decker, so to speak. Then that's would be acceptable, right? So we thought we think that this cleans things up. Now we made it optional. If you don't, like, say here's an island here, there's no receptacle outlets that are required on this island as part of the 2023, but as part of the 2020, you would have to measure this way, measure that way, multiply that, figure out your square footage, and then start doing your math. The first so many square foot needs 1, and then 1 more for every so many square foot, and then you'd have to put 1 probably somewhere over here on either side. You'd have to put your receptacle outlet on the face, and that's just one of those things where you say, boy, that's a lot to do, to handle. So, and you're placing more and more of those receptacles on these applications, and you're promoting that draping over the edge of the island or peninsula, and you're increasing the chances that a child or somebody in a wheelchair, an elderly person, or somebody your age or my age, hooks that cord and pulls the appliance off of that counter. So the provisions that are in 21052 that are in the 2023 code provide some relief for the installer in those applications. All right, so my NFPA link is sort of giving me some heartburn here. I gotta change my. So let me ask you, while I'm doing this, tell me, give me some examples that you think of, that you can think of. Put them in the chat. Share your knowledge. What are some of those items in the 2023 code, or even the 2020 code? Because there's still states on the 17 code. There's still states in the Stone Age. I don't know what Washington D.C. is still on, but that's a whole nother area of discussion on trying to keep the code adoption consistent across all of these different areas. So let me do this. I gotta type the password for the Hilton that I'm in. Because I'm in a hotel, I'm in a Hilton hotel, and I'm going to connect to their network just to speed things up a bit. Okay. Hopefully this works. All right, so think about some of those areas. What other areas in the NEC? Let's take a look at. I believe I'm connected, but let's take a look at let's go back to the 2020 code, discard all of my changes, and I'm going to go back to the 2020 code. So let's think about things that happened. What were some of the areas of require? Oh, here's another one. And I'm not sure if this is a good thing or a bad thing. I guess it depends on who you're talking to. So 705. Think about interconnected systems. If, and that's an Article 7. That's Chapter 7, Article 705. If you recall, in the 2020 code, remember what they did in 705, interconnected systems. So where was the debate? Between Code Making Panel 4 and Panel 10, there was a lot of debate and disagreements on when you're connecting a photovoltaic or whatever system to the line side of the service disconnecting means. Say you were using those Vampire, I don't know, I call them Vampire, the Polaris lugs and all these other different great tools that we use for connecting. Let's say that you were using something like that. Is that a service conductor or not? And I'll tell you, the one school of thought from, say, the Panel 4 guys and gals would be those who were installing photovoltaic systems. They would not want it to be called a service conductor, because then that means that brings other implications, right? You would have to think about the number of disconnects. You'd have to think about the location of the disconnect, the labeling of the disconnect, and so you may run into a disagreement with your AHJ, who may tell you that's a service conductor. And you might go, well, we're here on the 2020 code and we call those power source output conductors. And then 705 has requirements for power source output conductors. and 690 has requirements. So you may say, well, look, those aren't power source output conductors. But then if you went to the definition of what a service conductor is and what the service over current device, and look at the requirements for when you have a service conductor and wherever it lands, is that service disconnecting means, is it listed as suitable for use as service equipment or suitable only for use as service equipment? Does it have to require the bonding there? Do you need to pull the grounding electrode conductor there? If you don't have that clear with your AHJ, then that's a bottleneck for you, right? You don't want to find out after the fact that you were supposed to pull a grounding electrode conductor, that it was supposed to be grouped and located at a specific area, right? You don't want that to be a point of contention, because fixing something after the fact can be and is probably very expensive if you really think about it. So getting these ground rules laid down up front. So what panels 10 and 4 did during the 2023 code cycle was they said, look, we're going to clear this up. This is what it is. Now, this could work for you or against you, right? So, and the reason I say that is because, let's say, for example, you're saying, no, I'm following the 2020 code, and you're saying it's a power source output conductor, and the connection is a gray area per the code based on the language in the NEC, that I could argue it both ways, and your AHJ is saying, no, this is a service conductor, that needs to be a service disconnecting means, and you're going back and forth. All that AHJ has to do is say, let's take a look at the 2023 code, and they added the clarity, and that is a service over current device. And now you lose your argument. You lose your edge as the what was it in the Outlaw, Josie Wales? Remember? That was his edge. Remember he kept what did he do? He kept the sun to his back. That was his edge. So 705 in the if you look at 705.11 supply side source connections in the 2020 code, you'll see the use of the term the power source output circuit conductors from the service conductor point of connection to the first overcurrent protective device. They're not calling them a service conductor. They're calling it a power source output circuit conductor from the service conductor point of connection. And somebody on panel 10 may say, well, if you're coming from the service point to the first overcurrent device, it's not a power source output conductor, it's a service conductor. And they'll go back and forth. And I'm telling you, you don't want to be caught in the middle of a debate like that when your money is on the line because you bought equipment. So get that clarity up front. This is an area that you can benefit, or you can benefit from the clarity. You may argue that, well, if you call it a service conductor, Tom, then I have to group this and it's going to cost me money. I'm going to have to pull the grounding electrode conductor to this, and that's going to cost me money. You may argue that that I'm going to have to label, I'm going to have to do certain things because it's now a service disconnecting means, and that's going to cost you money. But I'm telling you, you'll spend more money fixing it if you and your AHJ do not agree up front. That's just my opinion. That's my opinion. Remember, what is on this program comes out of here, originated here, and it's all from the heart. I'm not trying to tell you anything wrong. And if I am wrong, please use the notes. That is what this channel is all about. We're going to share information. So if you want to share some of what your knowledge on this area, if you have areas where the 2023 maybe alleviated some cost that you may have had, or added clarity that may help you and you're on an older edition of the NEC, and maybe you can leverage the newer edition of the NEC as you work your way through debates with the AHJ, put that down in the notes. We need to hear from you. That's what the IAEI is all about. Remember, we are a network of like-minded individuals. We in the IAEI, if you talk to any IAEI member, I say any is a big word. Most IAEI members have the same thing in mind. We all want to increase safety. We all want to protect our electrical industry. And by doing so, we are going to provide protection and value for those who live in the structures that we build, and those who interact, work on, or maintain electrical infrastructure that we have put together for them. We all have the same thing in mind. I don't think there's anybody out there who is out to try to hurt somebody. We want to follow the rules. We want to do things the right way. And that's what the IAEI is all about. So please, let's send this one off the rocker here and put as many notes as you can. Share your information. Tell us where you're from. If you're watching this video and you chat it up, this is going to be a premiere video. You can chat live. I'll do what I can to chat in here as I can. So I'm presenting from 11:30 to 12:30 Central, which is 12:30 to 1:30. So I should be able to chat it up from 12 to 12:30, or 12 to something after 12, because I'll probably have to kick somebody off stage. But anyway, so let's talk about. All right, so those are two areas. Excuse me. You know, it's something how everybody's afraid to cough these days because everybody thinks, oh, he's got COVID. The moment you have a sore throat or anything like that. All right, so how about, here's another one. Well, I guess I wouldn't say that. 210. Let's think about 210. All right. Oh, before I do that, let me do a plug here. So, IAEI, we were talking about the membership, your engagement with the electrical industry. Remember that we have coming up here soon, shortly, relatively shortly. We have the IAEI section meetings. So there's a Northwest and Southwest section. Both of those are going to be done together. So we have a Northwest section and we have a Southwest section. They're going to conduct a joint section meeting together. And then there's the Western section. We have the Eastern section, the Southern section, and the Canadian section. So if you go to IAEI.org, you'll be able to connect and view the if you go to my browser is really slow. You're going to see it populating. You're going to go to education from IAEI.org. You'll go to education and you'll see section meetings right there highlighted in blue. If you click on your section meetings, it's really slow, but there we go. So you have the Southwest Northwestern section joint meeting. That is August 27th through the 31st in Bakersfield, California. Bakersfield, wasn't that a song? Had a good saxophone lead in it. Canadian section, September 22nd to the 24th. That's in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Then you have the Western section, September 17th and 20th in West by God, Virginia. Smile when you say it. So that's going to be a blast. I will be there. Jack Jameson will be there. Cindy Jameson will be there. Tim McClintock will be there. Tom Moore will be there. We will have, we'll just have a host of, what's nice about the section meetings, you'll have a lot of code making panel members and correlating committee members. Larry Ayre is going to give us an update on the changes that are coming up in the, for the structural changes in the NEC and more. And then finally, you have the Southern section, October 8th through the 11th in Waco, Texas. That will be the last section meeting. So hopefully you can find one of these. And I'll tell you what, here's my opinion. Here's my thought process. If you're going to fly, if you have to fly to a meeting, you can pick whichever one you want to go to. I mean, it's a flight. Now, granted, if you're in New York and you've got to fly out to Bakersfield, California, that's going to be a heck of a long flight. But you can come on down to West by God, Virginia. Or you can go to down here to Waco, Texas. Or Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. You have your choice. So but my suggestion would be, if you are in the Western section or in the Eastern section, you're going to want to go to that section meeting for a couple of reasons. One, the people that you see there will be in your jurisdiction. You'll probably see your inspectors, or you'll see contractors. If you are an inspector, you might see contractors and consultants and utility individuals who are in your jurisdiction. So you would benefit by building those relationships locally. Very strong. Again, it's my opinion. But in reality, if you like the program and you just want to learn about a technology, you can go to any one of these section meetings. There's nobody going to look at you and say, hey, aren't you New York? Aren't you an Eastern section guy? So, in fact, there's going to be a gentleman that I know, Tom Dunn, and he's from Long Island, and Tom Dunn's going to be at the West Virginia chapter meeting. He's working his way around, and he's going to be in the area. So I'm looking forward to seeing him at the Western section meeting. So we're going to have some fun, and these are great resources, not just to get CEU credits, but to build the relationships that you will use for your career. So keep that in mind, that those section meetings are critical, will be, in my opinion, very critical for your success. All right. Some other areas in the code. We added some clarity in Article 220. In the 2020 edition, there were some, in my opinion, so 2020 code, in the 2020 code, in Article 220, we added clarity in the 2023 code cycle. We did a few things, right? We reinforced that recognition of energy management systems. And, that's another thing we did. And we added the clarity for, let me just click on this, give me a second here. So we added the clarity for, and we reorganized. So in some cases, the clarity in the latest edition is also very, very helpful. All right, so how about if you are out there in California, I believe, in California, we did see this as well. I want to make sure that I have the right edition here. But yes, here we go. All right. You ready for this? We have some new articles. So here's the thing. What a lot of people don't realize, we can go to these code adoption hearings and we can argue and fight about whether or not they want to adopt the latest edition and all the provisions, and the immediate thought process is, oh, this is going to add cost to the installations. Not so in many cases. And the other issue is that technology is moving at the speed of light. So we have new technologies, insulated bus pipe tubular covered conductors. We have flexible bus systems. Now, what happens if you're on the 2020 or earlier edition of the code and you come across a flexible bus system? What do you use to determine the rules for protecting that equipment? If it's not in the edition of the code that you have, how do you determine what you're required to do to provide proper protection? It's in the 2023. So if you come across a flexible bus system, you may say, look, I'm going to go out there to the 2023 code. There's an Article 371. Explain that to the AHJ, and maybe you two can come up to an agreement on following some of these rules. But quite frankly, they don't have to. They could make you follow a complete different set of rules, which may be more strict and more stringent, because they're saying, look, we didn't adopt that edition. I'm not obligated to go over there. I'm going to make you follow these rules. And you may go, you're going to make me do X, Y, and Z, and I don't have to because these 2023 edition. Just saying. Adopting the latest edition of the code has its value. How about if you run into an Article 5, a cannabis oil equipment? And I thought there was a 726 Class 4 power systems. Right, so there was a technology that's being introduced into the power distribution systems for commercial buildings, etc. And you might see this technology. Well, in the 2020 code, they didn't cover Class 4, this pulsed power applications. This is a pulse of power that's much higher than the voltage signals that you'd see in anything that we have back here in Chapter 7 or 8. And what rules do you follow if you're on an earlier edition of the code? So my suggestion is, one of those areas, if you're running across something you've never seen before, and you're on the 17 code, you can take the 2020 code, take a look and see what new articles were added. Maybe one of those new articles addresses exactly what you are working with. And then your job is to figure out, let's take a look at those requirements, work with your AHJ to say, look, I'm installing new technology here. Our state has not adopted the latest edition of the code, and there are requirements, installation requirements in the latest edition, because if you do something different that is not as restrictive as what's in the latest edition, you may have safety concerns for your installation. So you may want to, in my opinion, look through the added new articles and some of the deleted articles and understand why they were deleted, where they moved to in some of the newer edition of the code. So I rambled on for about an hour. We pointed out some areas to help you understand the value of still looking through changes that maybe your state hasn't employed yet. Your state may have just adopted the 2020 code, but keep in mind, there are products being introduced into the markets that you may face, and applications that are now prevalent that you may face, and we don't have requirements in your edition of the code, but we have them in the 2023 edition of the code. Or maybe you're on the 17 and there are provisions in the 2020 code that fill those holes and gaps and add the clarity so that you're not arguing with your inspector, or your inspector's not arguing with you, right? So clarity ease of use of the code. There's a lot to be said about that. So maybe some of the changes that have come after the edition that you're currently on can help you avoid added cost to your final product for your home, for your application, or maybe it just may reduce the number of gray hairs that you have, right? So, and maybe remove some hard feelings that are created after those debates and heavy debates and arguments. All right, so hopefully you got something out of our little hour today. Please chat it up, put your comments in, give your examples. If you know of other areas in the 2023 edition of the code that may provide some relief that is not addressed in the 2020 edition, drop that down in the notes. Share what you know. You never know. You may help another fellow IAEI member out of a jam. That's what the IAEI is all about, keeping things safe, making our lives easier. All right, so hopefully, like I say, hopefully you got something out of this, and I appreciate you spending your lunch hour or whatever portion of the day it is that you're watching this, whether you're watching it live or maybe this is 2 or 3 months from when I actually posted this. Remember, it's always up here. You can find all of these sessions on our www.youtube.com/IAEI International. Check it out, like it, subscribe to it, and use it to help you. And remember to share. Share your knowledge. Share this site with someone else you know. All right, everybody. Thank you. Good night. Have a good day. Thanks for what you do for the electrical industry. Thanks for what you do for electrical safety. And remember to stay safe, and please, by all means, stay healthy. See you next week.